Hey guys, I'm Dave and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today, we're going to try to bring this old plane back to life. If you've been following the channel for a while, you've probably figured out that I'm really a power tool guy. But every once in a while, a hand tool comes in, well, handy. And this plane's been kicking around the shop for so long, I have no idea where I got it. Near as I can tell, it's the equivalent of a Stanley number 5, but it's seen some better days. And it probably isn't that great of a plane. It has no manufacturer's name on it. Simply has Made USA stamped in there. The handles are plastic, and pretty much all the bare metal areas have some rust to them. But I'm going to see if we can bring this back to life and make it a useful tool again. All I needed to disassemble the plane was a flat tip and a Phillips head screwdriver. I started by loosening the lever cap screw and then removing the lever cap. The chip breaker and blade came out next, and I removed the screw that connects the two together. Next came the front knob and the rear handle. I didn't bother removing the screws from the handles since I plan to replace them when the new handles come in. The frog came out next after removing its two mounting screws. I spun off the blade adjuster and the pawls that work with it, but left the lateral adjusting lever connected to the frog since it's basically riveted in place. The blade looks to be in decent shape, and the sole of the plane seems to be relatively flat. Since the sole looked okay, I decided to start with 400 grit wet-dry sandpaper on quarter-inch glass that I use for sharpening. It may not be dead flat by machinist standards, but it's close enough for me. After several minutes of work, the high areas were coming along nicely, but there was still a lot of low spots. Maybe it's time to step to a more aggressive grit. I swapped out the 400 grit for some 220 wet dry and tried again. Several minutes later, I realized I was making progress, but not enough. Let's try 180 grit. I didn't have any wet dry on hand, so I used what I had. And while it's advertised as clog resistant, sanding metal dulls aluminum oxide paper pretty quickly. I also switched to some 3/4 inch MDF as my substrate so I could get longer strokes in. By this point I've got less than an hour of sanding in and most of the sole is flat, but I'm not there yet. Since the feel-like temperature is 104 degrees, I'm going to call it a day. I switched back to 220 grit wet-dry paper to finish cleaning up the bottom, at least for now. I got close except for some low spots around the throat. I'm not sure that I'll ever get that cleaned up. And I also got some discoloration using water on the wet-dry paper, so I eventually switched over to a light oil instead to lubricate the paper. And if you're wondering why I moved inside, once the bottom looked good, I switched over to try to clean up the sides. I used this large piece of ash as a square edge in the hopes of keeping the sides square to the base. This isn't critical to the plane's operation, but it might help while using a shooting board. There were a few low spots, and it took some time to get the sides square and flat, but I got there eventually. In the process of cleaning up the sides, the corners became pretty sharp. Since I get enough cuts around here already, I decided to ease the corners with some 400 grit paper. A few swipes on each edge was all it took to clean those up. I gave it a good cleaning to remove any remaining dust and oil. I figured mineral spirits would do the trick, and I used a paper towel, an old toothbrush, and a pipe cleaner to get into all those tight spaces. I gave that time to dry and then taped off all the surfaces that wouldn't be painted. I added a bolt into each mounting point to prevent the threads from filling with paint, and then gave it a couple of coats of black spray paint. With the body nearly complete, it was time to start on the blade. There was rust and pitting on both sides, so I started with the 220 grit paper to clean things up. I didn't try to get the blade perfect, just remove the worst of the rust. I switched back to the sandpaper and glass to get things a little cleaner and hopefully flatter. To start the real sharpening, I got up my Worksharp WS3000 tool sharpener. The first step is to flatten the back. This clearly isn't a great blade, and there was a fair amount of distortion. You don't need to flatten the entire back, ideally just the first inch or so. Even still, with this wonky blade, it took a while to get things flat. I got maybe the first half-inch flat before moving through the grits to clean it up. If the plane works out well, I'll buy a new blade for it, but for now this will do. With the back flat, I can start on the cutting edge. I set my tool rest to 30 degrees and started with the 120 grit disc and began another long session of grinding. The existing grind wasn't too far off, but there were some low and rusted spots. Nothing that a bit more grinding won't take care of. Okay, maybe a lot more grinding. After what seemed like hours, the blade was close, but I know I could do better. Sadly, the feels-like temperature was 104 degrees again, and I had to call it a day. The next day, I came back to finish the bevel. The low spots on the blade would not have affected the cutting edge, but I know if I don't fix it now, it'll be there forever. So back to the grind, and yes, I finally got it clean. Then it was time to work through the grits. The final step is to strop both sides. I start with the back to remove that final curl of metal from the sharpening process. Then I cleaned up the bevel. This is mostly by feel, but I start at the heel and lift the blade up until the full bevel is touching the pad. Just a few moments later and I've got a mirror-like finish. The blade was set aside and it was time to clean up the frog and the lever cap. Again, more toothbrush, pipe cleaners, and mineral spirits. With the parts clean and dry, I again taped off the non-painted parts and gave them a few coats of black paint. There are a few more small bits that could use some cleanup. I put a buffing wheel in the drill press and buffed the two pieces of the blade adjuster. The adjusting pawl was cleaned using some needle nose pliers. The adjustment wheel was first held by hand, but then I put it on a bolt to hold it more securely. I'm not going for a factory finish here, I just wanted to clean up the years of corrosion. I figured while I was here, I'd also polish a chip breaker. A few minutes was all it took to clean up the last of the parts. I noticed the underside of the chip breaker didn't sit level on the plane blade. I went back to the 220 grit wet paper on my glass plate and evened the bottom as best as I could. It could use a bit more work, but my arthritis started to flare up, so I settled for close to flat. Now that everything is clean, flat, and sharp, it's time to reassemble this plane. I started with the frog and screwed it in place, making sure it was centered and square to the body of the plane. Then I added the chip breaker to the blade and secured them with the screw. The edge of the chip breaker is just behind the edge of the bevel. I hope that's correct. Next came the blade adjuster. The trick here is to get the pivot pin into the pawl and seat it in the correct location while adding the adjustment nut. Just take your time and you'll get there. Next, I set the blade and chip breaker in place and added the lever cap. I snugged up the screw and then locked the cap in place. This was when I realized the handles needed to go on first, so that this was all just practice. I ordered some new handles, and after a little sanding and a coat or two of lacquer, they were ready to mount. The front knob went on first and threaded into place with no problem. The rear handle took a bit more effort. This rear handle is designed for 2 mounting screws. This plane has 1 mounting hole and a registration pin. To locate that pin, I put some white paint on it and then set the handle in place, transferring the paint to the handle. After clamping the handle in place with the bottom square to the drill press, I used a 17/64 brad point bit to drill the hole. I made sure to set my depth stop so I would not go too deep and blow through the top of the handle. After tweaking the upper mounting hole and cutting off about a ½ inch of the threaded rod, I got the handle mounted snugly, even without that front screw. After reassembling the plane again, it was time to take it for a test drive. I'd like to say that it was perfect right off the bench, but let's be real. I'm a power tool guy, and it took a few minutes of tweaking to get it to cut this well. It could still use some adjustments to cut a bit smoother, but I'm pulling off these paper-thin pieces, and I'm going to call that a win. I've got about $20 invested in refurbishing this plane. A lot of hours, but not much cash. And while it still needs a little adjusting, it still would have saved me a lot of time on my last project. Now all I have to do is finish that workbench I started building about 30 years ago, learn how to use this appropriately, and it will all have been worth it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. Was there something I could have done differently, easier, smarter? Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear. As usual, I've listed some of the tools and supplies that I used during this video in the description below. Along with that is a link to my Amazon store, which has a lot of the tools that I use on a daily basis as well. And some of them have affiliate links, and should you need to purchase one of those and do it through the link, it does help keep this channel going. If you enjoyed this video, maybe give us a thumbs up and share it with friends. If you haven't already, maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button, little bell, so you get notified each time I put out a new video. As always, I don't have a clue what's coming up next, but it should be interesting. So until then, have a great day, stay safe, we'll see you soon.